Welcome to the Developers Who Test podcast, a podcast for developers who embrace test automation so they can ship better quality software faster and have more fun doing it. I'm your host, Chris Harbert, and today I'm here with Rik Marselis. Rik is a thought leader in our industry, international conference speaker, and principal quality consultant at Sogeti, where he leads testing projects, investigates trends in IT, and trains other people. Today's episode of the Developers Who Test podcast is brought to you by Testery.com. Whether you're a developer who has just a handful of tests or even thousands, then your tests deserve to be running on the fastest and most reliable platform for open source testing. With AI-driven insights and analytics, unparalleled parallelism, and awesome integrations, Testery enables you to get more from your tests. Check us out today at Testery.com. Welcome to Developers Who Test, Rik.
Yeah, good to be there. Thanks for the invitation, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So I love starting out with hearing about people's journeys because a lot of us have similar paths to how we got into this. And then a lot of us have very different paths in how we got into this. So could you share a little bit about how you first got started in software testing?
Well, it's quite easy how it started because I was trained as a COBOL developer, and the thing I learned very early on was a COBOL program is not ready if there's not a test set with it. Now, some of the listeners may think COBOL programs, that seems quite old. That's true because my education started in 1980, so that's 43 years ago. But even then, it was already very common that you tested your own software. Actually, sometimes I now come across some people that think it's not too common to test your own stuff. But for me, that has always been natural. And then you may remember the year 2000 problem, when the whole world needed to check all their systems, whether they did or did not have the so-called Y2K bug. And that involved so much testing that back then I, became fully focused on quality and testing and never left it again. So I'm fully focusing on quality and testing for 25 years now.
Yeah, I had no idea you were testing for the Y2K bug. Was most of the testing that took place for that, was it manual or was it automated?
Well, the whole Y2K meant a boost for both. So both for more people in testing, but also using tools for testing. Because a lot of people were really afraid of the Y2K bug, which to me still is puzzling why they were so afraid. Because funny thing is, when I started as a programmer in the early 1980s, a simple thing that we learned was if you register a date, always include the century, because otherwise we will have a problem in 20 years from now. And then just before the Y2K, then apparently a lot of people had not learned that lesson. And I was very puzzled because most of the software that I and my colleagues had to test was more recent than from the early 1980s. So a lot of people had not gotten that memo. But it's really emphasized that we needed to do a lot of testing just to see what happened if you change the date from 99 to 00. And actually, there are a lot of anecdotes of nice problems, but in reality, the whole Y2K was actually a bit of a, how do you call this in English? In Dutch, we say a night candle that goes out. So just, and because in the end, nothing really went wrong.
I think in the US we might call that a nothing burger.
Okay, sounds nice. Yeah, yeah. So, but the good thing of Y2K was that it really boosted the testing as a profession, and also the understanding of people, especially at management levels, that testing actually is a thing, is a different profession.
You know, one of the interesting things about that is, you said we saw it coming 20 years in advance, and I think there are a lot of software quality issues that happen because of a lack of foresight, but that foresight is there if we are just paying attention to it, right? So like you might get an email from one of your service providers that says, "Hey, guess what? In 1 year, we're going to turn off your database and we're going to automatically upgrade it and then you'll be on the
Yeah.
new version," right? A lot of people get that email and they just choose to delete it.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
true.
a year later, they wonder why they have a software quality issue, right? So I don't know what you call that kind of problem, but it seems to be somewhat prevalent that there are a certain number of software quality issues that we can fully anticipate, and there's some business process that's lacking or some awareness, some paying
Yeah.
attention that's lacking. And I don't really know how to well address that one than say to people, hey, just pay more attention.
Well, I more and more have come to the conclusion that there is one specific reason why these things happen, and that is because we as a society want more than we can handle. So if an agile team says, okay, our velocity is, let's say, 100 story points, and then the product owner says, yeah, but you need to do these 20 extra, then in my opinion, the agile team should say, if we want to achieve our quality goals and want to adhere to the agile manifesto, then we can do 100. So you select which 20 we don't do. And then often they say, yeah, but you have to do it anyway. And then we start cutting corners. And that's the moment when we think, okay, well, this memo of something next year, we can forget about it for the next 10 months. Only thing is, they then forget about it for 12 months and then it goes wrong. But the main thing is, we often simply want too much. So often when I speak with responsible managers, I emphasize that they must make choices. Either they give more budget so we can have more people, then we can do more stuff, or they want less stuff done and then we can do it with less people, because that's the permanent challenge. And one of the things I observe amongst both developers and testers is that they are often too willing to go with the demands of like a product owner, because it's a nice person and they think, if we do one evening overtime, we can manage. But the next time he will ask for 140 story points. And then before you know it, you have the so-called team burnout. And that's what you want to prevent. Yeah, so
Yeah.
uh,
I I always think it's interesting when we do things in one profession but not others. And I was mentioning in an earlier episode, I've done some volunteering where you help do construction projects to build houses. And being a quality person, I of course look at everything they do from a quality perspective, and I think about how they measure the doorway before they put the door in because it might be slightly different than what they said it was going to be, and all these kinds of things, right? And to me, just this idea of telling somebody you want 50% more, but you don't want to make time for it, you don't want to pay for it, and you don't want them to cut corners. Like, you wouldn't see that happening in other places, right? Or you would see people push back on it a little more and say,
yeah,
uh,
well,
I'm putting in these doors. The doors have to be able to open and close. I'm not just going to go and put in 5 doors that don't open and close because you asked for 5 doors. I'm going to make sure that I do the job right. And
yeah,
it's
yeah, well,
weird to me
and
that we treat software differently sometimes, you know?
yeah, well, there's two things to that. The one thing is, in building a house, it's much more tangible, so people see what's happening and can also imagine what happens if, for example, you don't measure the door. I recently saw a house where they put in a door that was 10 centimeters short. So there was a big gap between the door and the wall. And then you think, how can this be? But it's this kind of reasons. And the other thing is that, uh, yeah, a lot of people think if you build software properly, you don't need to test it. So you can save time by not testing.
Hmm.
And basically they're right. If you do a perfect job, you don't need to test because it will work. The only thing is people are fallible, so we never do a perfect job. and then testing is not just finding things that are wrong, but also even just confirming that things have gone well. Like the example you gave, where somebody first measures when he's putting in the door. His measurement may show that it actually fits. Well, that's fine, but still he measures. And that's also what we should do with testing, make sure that it fits.
Yeah, I think that deliver the perfect product thing so you don't have to test it also ignores the fact that you're not just writing the test for you, you're writing it for the next developer who's going to come in 5 years from now, first day on the job, new company. They
Yeah,
want to be productive as soon as possible. They have to know, what does this thing do? And did that change I make just break anything? And so it doesn't really matter how much knowledge and skill you have. If you're handing this living, breathing software over to somebody else and expecting them to make changes to it, I feel like the tests are kind of for those people too, right?
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So you started out on the development side and got more into testing through the Y2K thing. How did you end up into the consulting world where you're working with all kinds of different companies?
Well, maybe I think there's two reasons. So one reason is I'm interested in very many different things. So I don't like to focus on just one thing. Second thing is I'm quite easily bored. So if you put me on a project 5 days a week for 5 years, then I will never survive. So if you want me to contribute to a 5 year project, put me on it for 1 day a week. Because then the other 4 days a week, I will do other things and then I will manage. Or you put me on a full time project for half a year. So that's the kind of person I am. And over the years, I have noticed that on the one hand, I can uh, learn quickly about new projects. So I quickly know what it's about. And that also, of course, there it helps that I have a lot of experience. So a lot of things look similar to something from the past. Another thing is, I really like working with other people and transferring knowledge and skills so that they can do the job and then I can move forward. And that's typically what a consultant does. So it was never my specific plan to become a consultant, but gradually I grew into it because of the way I'm acting.
Hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things I like about helping other companies is, test automation. Uh, once you learn it, there's certain techniques that you apply, but you can apply those same techniques to any domain. And so it's fun to go to a different company and, this one company is making software for construction sites so that they can send out invoices. Another company is a banking system, and another company is doing some other wild and crazy thing. And so it really is interesting to learn about all these business models, meet new people while still providing your skills and everything. So I totally get that. So I noticed that you also do training and that you're an accredited trainer for several different certifications.
Yeah.
Uh, why should folks in our industry consider having these certifications? What's the value in getting certified?
Yeah. That's a question that I've come across many times over the last decades. So I'm doing accredited training courses for certifications for about 20 years now. And there are two, maybe three main reasons. So one simple reason for people wanting to have a certificate is that they want another job or another assignment, and then the people hiring them uh, have no clue about the profession, in this case, the testing profession or an other part of IT. So the hiring people have no clue about it. So the only thing they can check is, do you have a certificate? So, so that's a reason. A far more important reason to me is that people want specific knowledge and skills. And to get knowledge and skills, you need training. And I have noticed really in practice that if people know that at the end of the training course, they need to do an exam, they pay more attention and they are more active in the training course. So then it's not the certificate itself that's valuable, but the fact that they know they will be challenged to see whether they actually have the knowledge and skills. So that's another thing. And last but not least, the good thing of a certification scheme is that you make a standardized set of knowledge that needs to be conveyed to people. And one of the things that is very good in that is just a common glossary, so that you don't have confusion about terminology. Because one of the things I often give as an example in my training courses is, how do you call it if you run a test and the result is different than the expectation? So the actual outcome is different from the expectation. Now, in my language, Dutch from the Netherlands, everybody uses one and the same word. But in the English language area, which of course is vast, there are so many different words that there's often just confusion about the word they use and not even about what else they need to do. So, and then it's good to have certifications that have a specific glossary, so then you can refer back to the glossary and say, okay, let's use the same term.
Yeah, that's a point I hadn't considered before, but it's so true. And first of all, I'm curious, what word would that be? Non-deterministic, or am I using a different word?
How you mean in the
for
word?
A test that has a different output each time you run it?
No, it's not each time you run it. It's just
Flaky,
you run a test.
non-determinist.
No, this is just you run a test and the result is different from expected, so the test fails. So
Okay.
how do you call a failing test? And then in the ISTQB glossary, let's start with the TMAP glossary, which I'm heavily involved in. We call it an anomaly based on the IEEE 1044 standard. In ISTQB, they talk about defect management, so the word defect is used, but the ISTQB glossary is not totally clear, because they also use defect for a fault, and a fault is an example of something that may lead to an anomaly. But commonly in IT, people talk about bugs, and in most glossaries, bug is not a standardized term, but it's the most used term. And I always say, as long as everybody in the project uses the same term, I don't care what the term is, as long as there's no confusion. But as soon as you do get confusion, then grab the glossary you like and make the agreement that you all use the same word from the glossary. So you don't have confusion, because confusion is the first and maybe one of the foremost reasons for IT problems. People misunderstanding each other.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not overly pedantic or anything. I've heard things like integration tests. The term integration test has been used in wildly different ways, depending on what industry you're in and how big the companies you're in are. And so, I did some consulting for a very large insurance company, and integration testing was when 12 different teams who ordinarily don't talk to each other much and work on wildly different parts of the system finally bring all of their systems together for one big end-to-end test that spans multiple very large systems. And that was the integration test. Then you go to like a software as a service startup, and integration test means a unit test where we don't use mocks anymore, right?
Yeah.
Wildly different definitions of what is an integration test. And so if you walk into that other environment and you say, oh, well, we need to go and add 100 integration tests, like jaws might drop and they're like, well, what are you talking about? Like, we don't have the resources to do that. And then you
Yeah,
could be really confused and say, but come on, one developer can do it in a couple of weeks, right?
yeah.
uh, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's the kind of confusion that too often happens.
yeah.
And one of the things to solve that is simply don't use that kind of terms, but start with defining what you want to do. So instead of saying we're going to do an integration test, you just say we're going to do a test with multiple teams involving this and that system. And are you in? Something like that. And then people
Mhm.
think, oh, wow, is that what you mean? And then probably they might say, oh, yeah, we're going to do an end-to-end test. And you go, oh, okay, these people call it end-to-end test. And
Mhm.
I even once was in an organization where they had so much confusion about this kind of terms that everybody knows, but everybody has a different meaning, that I simply had defined 3 tests and I called them X, Y, and Z. And then nobody knew what they were, so they had to read the definition. And that worked very well. And after a time when everybody was talking about the Y test, then we gave it a useful name again. But first, force people to read the definition.
Yeah, I love that trick to get people to think about the definition. So,
Yeah.
speaking of industry and company size changes, on the certifications part, do you find that there are some industries that like certifications more than others, or maybe some countries that just it's more of a thing that they're looking for than others?
Yeah, well, there's a big difference between countries. That's very obvious. For example, in India, people do not even want to start a training course if they will not get a certification at the end.
Hmm.
Whereas in the Netherlands, where I'm from, most people couldn't care less.
Hmm.
Some people even forget to put the certificate on the resume because here it's not a thing. For example, I've been in the United States a few times, and then you often see in an office you see people's main certificate hanging on the wall. Here in the Netherlands, it's very rare that people put their certificate on the wall.
Hmm.
So it is a bit of culture. Another thing is you ask about industries. And of course, in high risk industries like aviation, medical machines, whatever, there is a much higher standard to quality. And that also reflects in the quality of people. And therefore, they want to see more evidence that people are qualified.
Hmm.
Whereas in some other industries, uh, yeah, people mainly look at what you're capable of. And also, I think the smaller the organization, the less important are certifications, and the more important are simply skills and hands-on experience.
Hmm. Do you think the certifications have kept up to date, or is there anything that you feel like with the industry shifting, there's new information or uh, new topics that should be included, or do they just
Oh yeah.
adapt over time with adding
Well,
things?
the um, the certification schemes that I know, and I'm personally involved in a couple of them. Um, they they always evolve, but they evolve at different paces. And that is often also by how the scheme is organized. So I myself am very much involved in the TMAP scheme. I'm one of the authors of the most recent book, Quality for DevOps Teams. And with the title of that book, we emphasize that DevOps is today's state of the art in IT. And thus, the whole TMAP certification scheme is fit for DevOps. If you look at, for example, ISTQB, which is the largest certification scheme in the testing industry, they uh, their organization is much larger, so it takes much longer to adapt to new things. So there, at this moment, DevOps is not really a thing yet in the certifications. On the other hand, the good thing of multiple of these schemes is that they often complement each other. So, for example, the TMAP certifications can perfectly be used in combination with ISTQB certifications. So you get some generic quality and testing knowledge from one end and some specific, for example, DevOps knowledge on the other end. And it's often by the people in the profession that you get these triggers. Like some people get together and say, hey, but we do need a new training course for this because people need these skills. And then often they decide to say, okay, we'll not just do a workshop or a training course, but we'll make it an official certification so that multiple people can benefit. And also it demonstrates more of a standard, because that's the good thing of a certification. You know exactly what people that have such a certificate, what kind of knowledge and skills they have acquired.
Yeah, we were talking some about the terminology being different from one company to the next. I've done a lot of hiring over the years of hiring test automation engineers, quality engineers, QA people. And it doesn't matter what you put in the job description or what title, inevitably, you're going to get a few different types of folks. You're going to get some people who only do manual testing. You're going to get some people who can probably copy and paste scripts but aren't really coders. You're going to get some people who can really write code and could be a developer in a production system. They just choose to focus on the test automation part of the problem. And I think that's probably an interesting area where the certifications could help you know, okay, what kind of tester am I about to talk to in this interview?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So a big part of this is the teaching aspect of it. What do you enjoy about the teaching aspect so much?
Well, the most interesting thing is working with groups of people. For me as a teacher, so another thing that I enjoy is to see if they actually have become better, because that's my aim, to help basically the whole IT world become better. And also for me it's fun. I like to work with people. I like to teach, and I also like to tell stories. And the nice thing, so I don't know if you mentioned it, but I think you did. So I also am asked to speak on conferences quite often. And some people after a conference talk come to me and say, oh, you had these brilliant examples from real life. And how are you able to just pop up such an example, especially in the questions at the end of a presentation? Well, the good thing is, since I do so many training courses, I give a lot of examples during training courses. And then when somebody asks me a question and I'm on stage, I remember one of those examples and I have it ready right away. So that's also how the different aspects of my work nicely tie in each other. And also sometimes people who have never presented on a big stage before ask me, how can I prepare for that? And my simple tip is start delivering training courses, because then you have an audience, and it's a small audience, it's still safe, but you become used to talking to an audience, and then it's less scary. And also you get routine in the basic stuff, like make sure there's a glass of water on stage. People that are new don't think of that because they have too many other things to worry about. But if you've done it a couple of times, you know, oh, maybe I need a glass of water during my talk. And I vividly remember the first time I was on a big stage, like in a theater with a couple of hundred people. after speaking 2 sentences, I had to walk to the place where the water was standing and take a few sips, because the first time still was quite scary, and then you're very happy that you have some water present.
Yeah. And I think for our audience, it's important to remember, you don't have to be a conference speaker to get started with leadership and public speaking. You don't have to be a trainer. There are opportunities within all of our organizations to start presenting to your teams. And, the folks I've seen who do that sort of thing, it's been very rewarding for them career wise, but also personal development wise, that they're starting to develop those skills. So you don't just have to jump straight into teaching training courses. If you can
No.
do a brown bag lunch session where you're
Yeah.
sharing with your team, how did you explore this new topic? And so I really like that
Indeed.
idea of just encouraging folks to share their knowledge with others. One of the things that you also mentioned, and I loved the way that you said this, is you described quality engineering as your hobby.
Yeah.
So it's obviously part of your job, but you describe it as a hobby. So can you go into more of like why you think it's a hobby as well as a job?
Well, I often explain that I turned my job in a hobby, and then you get an extra hobby, whereas some people turn their hobby into their job and then they lose a hobby.
Hmm.
So, but why is it a hobby? Well, I get the possibility to do the things I enjoy doing, and by doing them well, I also get the possibility to quit doing the things I don't enjoy that much. Um, because people see that some things I can do very well, and they are valuable to the company, because, of course, I have other hobbies and they are not so valuable to the company. So I don't do those in daytime. But by making it my hobby and doing the things I like, it's far more easy to put in effort. And sometimes I have to put in some extra effort because things aren't finished at 5 o'clock. And then, yeah, some people say, yeah, it's not finished, too bad. But I think, yeah, but we were supposed to deliver today. So then I'll go on a little bit, and I don't even see it as a burden, because it just is fulfilling to know that it's finished again. Um, yeah, and also it's just fun to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, I love the concept of turning your work into a hobby versus turning a hobby into your work. And the reason that resonates so well with me is, I'm a founder and CEO of Testery, which is a tech startup that helps run automated tests,
Yeah,
sponsor of this podcast. And part of how I keep my energy levels high and have been able to keep this thing going is, sometimes I just feel like trying to learn how to make graphics for PDFs, right?
yeah,
And sure, there could be someone else in the company that does that. There it absolutely makes sense to pay people to do that, and the quality of my work is probably not as good as theirs. But for me, it's I as a hobby, I would want to be doing something creative or learning a new skill. And if I can do something creative and learn a new skill, but then also create a thing of value that I incorporate into my company somehow, now I've found a way to make my work into a bit of a hobby. And so
yeah,
um, I think, it's probably good to have other hobbies. Like you have some hobbies that aren't work, I presume. Um,
yeah.
but to the extent that we can find fun things to do that still create value for the companies we work for, uh, it just makes it more fun and easier to keep the energy levels up. So,
Yeah, well, and talking about hobbies, what I've seen over the years is that often personal hobbies can still contribute to becoming better or more efficient or more rewarded in your profession. Um, for example, well, uh, some of my colleagues are very good at sketchnoting. So they hear a talk, they make a sketch note. Actually, I have one on my desk here. Well, the listeners can't see it, but one of my colleagues made this sketch note, and it's very fun for them, but it's valuable to me because I couldn't attend that presentation. But using the sketch note, I know exactly what the highlights were, and it's a good way to convey this kind of information. And then I look at it and I think, I would have loved it. I could do that, but I can't. Luckily, I can do other things. So one of my other hobbies is photography. So I often take my SLR camera with me to conferences, and then I take two kinds of pictures. One is of things that I won't want to forget, as things they show on the big screen. But another is of the people and nice things that are happening. And then I share these photos with people, and people like these photos and they share them again. And that helps in becoming asked again for a next conference because people remember the photo and remember who took it. So that's how hobbies can help each other. On the other hand, you can also have hobbies that don't have any relation with work, but still give you a peace of mind or a distraction if you have a busy job. And in that sense, again, hobbies support being effective in your work.
Yeah, so now I'm learning you were the photographer, and I'm wishing I'd known that prior to the conference because we were both at TestCon Europe, and you mentioned the bottle of water thing. I was smart enough to figure out the bottle of water thing. I wasn't smart enough to make sure there was somebody there taking pictures.
Oh, okay.
And so then I got back and I was like, wow, I could have used a couple of pictures to share with the community and everything of here's how it went and all. So but it's awesome that you can incorporate that hobby into your profession in a way that's useful and everything. So so I guess kind of we're coming towards the end of the episode here, so I kind of want to give you a chance to share what's coming up for you in the next few months. Anything exciting going on that you think our listeners should hear about?
Well, since our listeners are both people in development wanting to know more about testing and people in testing wanting to know more about development, I would like to end with a little bit about DevOps, because the good thing of DevOps is it is meant to be a culture where people take responsibility together and don't think in separated tasks anymore, but think in how are we together going to make this or solve this or whatever, and then switch roles whenever needed. So an example I often give is if I would be testing something and I find a small problem in the software, then I'd rather just change the software because it's not that difficult, and maybe check with someone else who has more knowledge. How do I do this? And then I just change it and then test it again. It works. And then you do a pull request. And then, of course, since you take responsibility together for quality, somebody else checks the work, because that's the essence of a modern cross-functional team, that you always have at least two people involved. But that way you make the team more flexible. And then people come to me and say, yeah, but I don't know about development before. For example, a tester who doesn't know about development. I say, well, start showing interest and talk with developers and you'll quickly learn. And that also goes the other way around. Some developers say, yeah, but testing is hard. And for example, how do I select test design techniques? Well, talk with a tester and ask them to explain to you. And then in your team, you learn, and quickly the effectiveness of the team as a whole grows. And my experience is that people also have more fun because they understand what the others do, and they have less time waiting for others to do something for them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a wonderful message that should resonate well with our audience, and absolutely important to think of things from a cross-functional perspective. It makes a happier, healthier, more productive team. So, who wouldn't want to do that, right? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So once again, we've been talking to Rik Marselis, who's a principal quality consultant at Sogeti. Really appreciate having you on the show, and hope you have a good day, Rik.
Thank you very much, Chris, and see you next time.